There's a guy, probably from experience that I see, there's a guy you might have heard of before. His name is Jim Elliot, missionary, 1950s. When I first heard this story when I was a kid, and it was just intriguing to me. 5 men, and really submitted themselves to what they felt God was calling them to do. They went down to Ecuador, and were trying to reach what was described as the most horrible people who live on earth. And there's a whole story that goes along with that. Some of you might be familiar with their story. But they were actually attacked and killed by the very people group who they were trying to reach. I think that we can learn from some other people's experiences, because there's this question that says, well, when do I say yes to God? Because there are other times I think that you might have a great opportunity that you need to say no to, but what is truly God's voice, and what is it some other voice? Maybe it's my own self-interest, or maybe it's my greed, or my needs, or my need to be needed, or my need to serve. But how do you sort that through? I think other people's stories are helpful in this. And out of that group of missionaries that went down to Ecuador, there are a couple men. Jim Elliot, I'm going to get to in just a moment. Another one of the missionaries is a man by the name of Pete Fleming. And his thoughts, these guys kept journals, which was really helpful now for us to learn some of their story. But Pete Fleming wrote these words as he considered going to Ecuador. He said this: "A call is nothing more or less than obedience to the will of God, as God presses it home to the soul by whatever means he chooses." Now, Pete Fleming was working with a fairly peaceful tribal group. And as he considered moving from that group to this, the very much warlike out Indians, he wrote this. He said, "It is a grave and solemn problem, an unreachable people who murder and kill with extreme hatred. It comes to me strongly that God is leading me to do something about it, and a strong idea and impression comes into my mind that I ought to devote the majority of my time to this." And he says, "This may be the most important decision of my life, but I have a quiet peace about it." Have you ever made a difficult decision but just had this quiet peace about it? That's kind of his story. And then Jim Elliot, he wrote to a friend regarding his really this understanding of his calling to go to Ecuador. He wrote this: "The command is plain. You go into the whole world and announce the good news. To me, Ecuador is simply an avenue of obedience to the simple word of Christ. There is room for me there, and I am free to go. The will of God is always a bigger thing than we bargained for." So that's line one more time. The will of God is always a bigger thing than we bargained for. So you guys have been working through men and women for a long, long time. And I think we can learn from some of their stories. 1950s is not the earliest that this goes back to. In fact, we go to the Bible. There's story after story about how men and women were placed into the will of God. Sometimes forcibly, and other times very willingly saying, "Here I am, send me. I want to be part of it. Put me in the God." I want to open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 12 tonight. We're going to just look at one story, and I just want to pick out 5 words from the story. It's the call of a man. Eventually, his name would be Abraham. When we run here in Genesis 12, we see the name Abram. This is before God has changed his name. But this is a man who is called to be on mission 24/7. He was sent out into his world. He had a pretty major change of context. And like I said, I just want to pull a couple things out of this passage tonight as we make a little bit of application to our lives. So Genesis chapter 12, the Lord had said to Abram, this is now verse 1, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions they had accumulated, and all the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Now let's pause there for a minute. We're just going to come back and pick up one more thing from this passage. But I want to notice a couple words here. As God talks to Abram, what's the very first word that he speaks? Leave, okay? It's not go, it's leave. Okay, leave is the very first thing. Leave and go. Now we'll get to the word go in a minute because that's a pretty important word too. Let's talk about this word leave first. He's to leave several things, and it implies a letting go. What's he to leave? 3 things. What's the first one? Okay, your country, Your people and your father's household. Let's take them one at a time. Your country. Now, when we think about our country in America, it's usually a political thing. I think about the flag and, government, all those kind of things. But the country is really the land. Now, think about where you grew up. There's something familiar about the place where you grew up. Here in Missouri, it's kind of the rolling hills, the Ozark Mountains, the woods and everything. Ice storms take the trees down. It's beautiful. I grew up in northwest Iowa, right along the Missouri River Belt. And on Thursday, I was going to the dentist up in St. Charles. I kind of went a different way, and I went up this Page extension. You got that way, 270, take the Page extension. And you drop down from these high bluffs down to this river valley, and all of a sudden, it's just like this little snapshot from going out to northwest Iowa. I just kind of crested that hill, and there's just this flat bottom land. You got the trees right along the river, and there's just a certain way that the land looked and it rolled that just reminded me of growing up. I just almost had this little twinge of homesickness as I just thought, oh, this is just like leaving my parents' home, going down past the mall, down to the river valley, and there's Nebraska right across the river. Well, there's something about the land, and you get familiar with the land, the way the land is, and the way that the sky is, the way the humidity tastes if you're in Missouri, not just right on your tongue. There are all kinds of things about the land. He was to leave that. And then he's to leave, what's the second one? His people. Now your people are also, this is not just individuals, but it's a whole culture. It's a way of being, it's a way of celebrating, a way of understanding life, a way of family. And all those things he's to also put together and put on that pound and to walk away from. And then the third one is your father's household. Well, what's connected with that? Well, that's the closest thing. That's your clan, right? And he took certain people with him, which is great. But there's this whole clan was still there. And then you think about maybe protection, you think about security, you think about belonging and love, all those things go together as part of your father's household. And God, in effect, is saying to him, I want to put everything that you are attached to and put them together and turn your back. Because until you're ready to let go of those things, you cannot accept the call to go. And so he's challenging Abram. He says, can you let go of all of your attachments? I know for us, I get attached to stuff. I get attached to people, and that's one of the greater obstacles, I think, sometimes about my next thing that I'm going to be called into. And maybe that's right here. I was reading a thing about John Eldridge. He said, this journey that we're on always calls for a change in heart. Sometimes a change in geography, but it always calls for a change in heart. And that's really what God is challenging here. He says, where's your heart? What's your heart set on? So that's the first word, leave. The second word is now go. Where's he to go? Well, he's to go to a land that God has shown him. It's like, come on, God. I'm already leaving everything behind. Why don't you just name the place? Give me a picture. Give me the place. I'm going to go online. I'm going to do a little research. I'm going to find out about how many days of sunshine this place has, what the median income is, what the traffic patterns are there, quality of life. Can we go out for a weekend trip? We're going to kind of check the place out. We're going to go out for a realtor, look at some housing. And then, if everything looks good and the money's right, of course, then I will follow the call. God says, Abram, I want you to leave and go to a land that I will show you. How many times do we want God to give us the whole picture right at once? God, if you clearly paint the picture where I'm going to end up, then I'll go. But I'm going to keep control. I'm going to measure this, and then I'll decide. God says, well, why don't you go this far, and then you'll see a little bit more clearly. He says, leave and go to a land that I will show you, and God will keep showing you that. And it happened in several phases, and he eventually got to where God wanted him to be. Go to a land that I will show you. But then there's a promise, and that's the next thing. There's a promise of blessing. Now, I don't want to minimize this promise, because if you look at the whole of Scripture, this promise is huge. You see, this promise has God's salvation stamped all over it. Because right now, God is saying to Abram, he says, through your descendants, I will bring blessing to all the peoples of the earth. And as we look at the rest of the Bible, we see that that promise was fulfilled in Jesus. So through Abraham's line, his descendant, he was going to bring out of that Messiah, Jesus, through which God would bring then salvation to everybody. Not just to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles. The rest of the New Testament is really clear about that. That came through Abraham's line. But God does work through our blessing of obedience, our little b, to bring his blessing, capital B, to everybody. And what does Abraham do? Very strangely, Abraham listens to this whole thing. And the next line is, Abraham obeyed and went just as God had told him.